Hey, I'm Abby and welcome to the Life Work Balance YouTube channel. Last week I shared a video about phone interviews. One of the things that I shared was that most phone interviews are the first interview, but not all first interviews are phone interviews. It's kind of like that saying, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. So, what can you expect from a first interview that is not a phone interview? Before I jump in, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. And to make sure you don't miss future videos, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. As I stated in my video about phone interviews, a phone interview is most often used to help a hiring manager or a recruiter determine if a full-blown interview is worth their time and your time. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and check out that video on phone interviews. It goes over a lot of information that is helpful when it comes to your first interview, especially if it's a phone interview. So let's go over a couple of reasons why a phone interview might be skipped and why a hiring manager, hiring team, or recruiter will just jump straight into the first interview being in person or virtual. Some reasons include a low candidate pool. Now, this might either be a low number of applications altogether or a low number of quality applications. So there's not 10 plus people for the hiring team to review. There's just a couple, and so they don't need to spend their time doing phone interviews. They'll easily be able to make their decisions based off of the in-person or virtual interviews. Another reason why a phone interview might be skipped and a hiring team just jumps straight into an in-person or virtual interview is because they've reviewed your application and your application materials, and they have determined that you're likely going to be a good fit for their culture and for the position based off of the information that you've provided. They may also have tight timelines. Let's say a hiring team wants to get someone onboarded into their new position within the next month. They may not have time to waste with phone interviews, and they may want to jump straight into the in-person or virtual interviews. And finally, one reason why the phone interview might be skipped is because the hiring team or recruiter just doesn't want to do phone interviews. They might just want to jump straight into the virtual interview or the in-person interview and skip the phone interview altogether. So with that being said, there's a couple of similarities and differences between a first phone interview and a first interview that's in person or virtual. Let's talk about the differences first. Duration is one of the major differences. A phone interview is traditionally 10 to 30 minutes. It's short. An in-person or video interview is typically longer. These interviews last usually between 30 to 60 minutes. So the long end of a phone interview is the short end of a video or an in-person interview. The content is also slightly different when it comes to an in-person or virtual interview compared to a phone interview. In-person or video interviews traditionally will include more behavior-based interview questions. So if you haven't already, please check out the video where I discuss the formula that will allow you to answer almost any interview question that's thrown at you, particularly the behavior-based interview questions. By having an in-person or a video interview, there's actually more time to expand on your answers and for the hiring team or interview panel to ask you additional follow-up questions to fill in some additional information that you may not otherwise be able to provide during the short time frame phone interview. So along these same lines, phone interviews are very surface level when it comes to the information that is shared and exchanged. In-person and video interviews allow everyone involved to get into more detail about the questions and answers that are coming through during the interview. Another major difference between in-person or video interviews and a phone interview is the number of participants. So with a phone interview, there's likely two people involved, the interviewer and you, the interviewee. However, with in-person and video interviews, there's usually more people who can be involved. So this will include multiple interviewers and panel members. This could be anywhere between 2 to 10 plus people involved in the interview. And the other major difference between a phone interview and a video or in-person interview is your appearance. With a phone interview, it doesn't matter if you're wearing your PJs and your hair is a mess because the interviewer won't see you. Though I do recommend that you still get dressed up just so that you can be in the mental mindset for your interview. An in-person and video interview, on the other hand, requires you to get dressed up, to polish up your appearance a little. When it comes to what you're physically wearing for an in-person or video interview, you need to look professional. I highly recommend that you dress one step above the daily attire required for the position. So let's say that you're interviewing for a position that allows you to wear jeans and a t-shirt to work every day. You will want to dress business casual. So some nice pair of slacks or a skirt and a nice blouse or button-up shirt is fine, or a polo is sufficient. If you're interviewing for a professional job where you are required to dress business casual, dressing it up a little bit more by adding a blazer or a sport coat will be beneficial. Add in a tie, maybe wear some nice shoes, and make sure that you physically look your best. If you're doing a video interview, you also want to physically appear your best, but you also need to clean up the space around you. For example, if you're sitting in your bedroom doing a video interview, you do not want all of your posters and a pile of laundry in the background. Clean up your walls and clean up the space behind you so that it's not distracting to the interviewers during the interview. So now let's talk about some of the similarities between a phone interview and the in-person or video first interview. Content. Now, while we said that content was also a difference between the phone interview and the in-person or video interview, content can also be very similar in each of those different types of interviews. The interviewers will want to gauge your interest in the position. If you're not appearing interested or enthusiastic about the position, they're probably not going to be interested or enthusiastic about you either. The interviewers are going to tell you about the position, give you some additional detail that may not have been available in the job posting that you viewed when you applied to the position. The interviewers want to gauge if you're going to be a good culture fit. This is a culture fit for the organization as a whole, a culture fit for the department and the larger team that you'll be a part of, as well as for the smaller team that you will be joining. Hopefully, things that are covered in these interviews include important logistic items like the pay for the position, future interview schedules and times, as well as position logistics, like where is the position located? Is it going to be in person or remote? And the schedule. Are you going to be working 5 days a week, 9 to 5? Are you going to be working in the evenings, weekends? What does that look like? And the interviewers will also want to go over your education and or experience and how it relates to the position. So regardless of if this is a phone interview or an in-person or video interview, they will want to review your experience and they'll likely ask you specific questions about how your experience relates to the position that you've applied to. So ideally, if you are a good fit based off of your answers to the questions during the interview, they will move you forward to the next rounds. If you're not a good fit, hopefully they'll let you know sooner rather than later so that you're not waiting around for them to get back to you. As I mentioned in the video about phone interviews, it is 100% acceptable to ask for feedback if you are told that they are not moving forward with you after an interview. I recommend framing your question as feedback or asking them for advice. And this would be like asking them for advice on how you can improve how you showed up for the interview, or how you might be able to change your job search to find a position that's a better culture fit for you. Most interviewers, while they do avoid giving feedback, will give you feedback if you ask for it. And as I stated in my phone interview video, you will want to ask questions at the end of any interview. So with your first interview, if it's not over the phone, it's in person or via video, ask questions at the end. 99.9% of the time, the interviewers will likely ask you if you have any questions for them. If they don't, it is perfectly acceptable to ask them if you have the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. If they say no, ask if you could follow up with some of your questions via email after the interview. If you are hesitant to ask any questions at the end of your interview and you're worried about how the interviewers will respond if you do ask questions, this could be a red flag about your fit with the organization. If you're nervous about how they're going to respond when you ask if you can ask some questions, then think about how that might impact you while you're actually in the job. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions during your interview, you likely will not feel comfortable asking questions when you're in the position. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions when you're in the position, that likely will not lead to success. So just consider, if you're not comfortable asking questions during the interview, how will that impact your overall happiness and success in the position if you were to get it? So with that being said, make sure you ask questions at the end of every interview. I actually have a video that is specifically about 3 types of questions that you should ask at the end of every interview. I've linked to it in the description below, so please go ahead and check that out if you would like further clarification. I do give examples of questions that you should ask at the end of your interview. However, If you need additional clarification, you can ask questions that clarify the role and responsibility and expectations for the job. So this clarifies the daily or priority tasks that the position would be responsible for, the responsibilities of the position, maybe ask what a typical day or week in this position looks like. You can also ask what their ideal candidate looks like. Now, this isn't physically what the candidate appears to look like. This is what they do on a regular basis. Is their ideal candidate organized? Is their ideal candidate a good communicator? Is their ideal candidate someone who is charismatic and outgoing and connects with their customers or their clients and can also build rapport with the people that they work with? What do they do well and what will they bring to the table? If you know what their ideal candidate looks like, you can position yourself as that ideal candidate for your next interview. You can also ask the really tough question, which is, does the hiring team, interviewers or interview panel, have any hesitations about you in this position? Do they have any hesitations about your experience, about your education or lack thereof? Did you say anything that made them hesitant? And if so, hopefully they let you know so you have the opportunity to clarify and defend your experience, your education, or one of your answers to the interview questions. This is really your opportunity to sell yourself. And I've had several people who have watched my video about the 3 questions you should ask at the end of every interview who said that they asked the hesitation question and it blew the interviewers away. One of the benefits about this question is it shows that you're open to feedback and you actively solicit it. Those are highly desirable traits of an employee. Someone who is not open to feedback and doesn't solicit feedback isn't the best option for an employee. So if you can show that you're open to feedback and that you will solicit it, that right there can set you apart from other candidates who are unwilling to ask that question. You can also ask logistical questions like, what are the next steps in the interview process? When can you expect to hear back about an interview decision? And ask if you can follow up with them if you don't hear from them within a certain time frame. So for example, let's say that it's a Wednesday that I have my interview. If I don't hear back from them by Monday, would it be all right if I followed up with them? They likely won't say no. And if you do ask this, make sure you get their contact information for either the recruiter, the hiring manager, or everyone on the interview panel. If you contact one or all of them on a certain day based off of the time frame that you set, one or more will likely get back to you with a response or with additional information. Just make sure you check out that video about the 3 types of questions you should ask at the end of every interview. So if you found this video helpful and you feel a little bit more prepared for your first interview, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns about your next interview, please go ahead and put them in the comments box below, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life-work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.